Good afternoon. I'm Nick Wakefield, co-founder of RegTech Asia, and welcome to this fireside chat on privacy and ethics considerations amid the growth in AI. To be joined by Francesca Montes, Head of Artificial Intelligence and Data Policy at UnionBank, a leading bank. In her role, she also serves as its Data Protection Officer. Before that, she used to be Senior Consultant and Data Protection Officer at Spanish-based business process outsourcing company Indra, a position that exposed her to international standards for data protection. She is one of the pioneers of Data Privacy Office of Global Telecom and of Standards and Compliance Group of TV5 Network. She is also one of the authors of the book Data Privacy and Cybercrime Prevention in the Philippine Digital Age, with almost a decade of experience in IT governance, legal compliance, cybersecurity, and data protection. Maria, welcome.
Good day, everyone. Good afternoon from here in the Philippines. How's everyone there?
So in this session, we'll be focusing on privacy and ethics considerations amid growth in artificial intelligence, a fantastic topic, mostly because a lot of what this is really moving towards and looking to is the unknown. And obviously, if we apply the same kind of principles and ethical considerations set on existing processes to algorithms and AI, I think we will kind of chart the right course. So feel free to ask any questions on the right-hand side. I've got a bunch of questions I'm excited to ask Maria. And obviously, if you want to, on the stage, ask some questions, I'll try and slip those in if I can, if not towards the end. So Maria, I'll kickstart the questions. Obviously, it would be great if you could give a quick introduction to yourself and perhaps the role that you're doing at UnionBank. And I think everyone would be really excited to know perhaps where, if anywhere, the bank is using artificial intelligence.
So I'm head of the artificial intelligence and data policies. And under that, I'm also leading the data privacy office, the data governance office, and the AI governance office. So they're all under my tower. And the topic is kind of stitching everything that I do in the bank, primarily because we started off first as a data privacy office, and then we expanded to data governance and AI. Of course, with the developments in the recent technology sphere and the trajectory of the bank to progress in the digital sphere, especially leveraging on AI and ML. So right now, we started first in AI. We first implemented AI in our chatbot. Okay, we call him Rafa. So we also have bot employees. So we implemented RPA and so on. So that kind of exposed my office to various technology sphere and how we implement privacy compliance and operations, privacy management operations in those kinds of processes. So we had to automate a lot of processes, not just for business optimization, but also for privacy compliance, because in privacy, it's more efficient to control everything when it's digital, right? So when it's manual, it's kind of hard to lock all of those papers in the proper places. However, in this case, when we had a project on AI chatbot, we kind of have to take a back step and reassess how privacy is impacting, or how we is the privacy impact assessment questions that we have in place, or the process in itself is sufficient for AI. So for example, in AI, it's not just located in one facility or an environment, right? We have to consider various points in the system, like the algorithm will run in various kinds of systems. It's not just located in one, right? So those are the things that we had to consider. It's quite more complicated when you put AI in the projects, and that's what exposed us to the AI sphere. And then there came the project on fraud detection. So we employed AI in how we detect fraud cases in our credit cards. So it kind of helped us to mitigate or lessen the false positives in terms of fraud. So in terms of manpower or operational costs, it really limited us, or it really cut down the cost on putting more people to check whether this is really false positives in true negative. So for us, it was really a revitalizing moment when we initiated those projects. And right now, we are using those kinds of experience in creating a fairness, test model. And in fact, we've been a member of the Veritas network of the Monetary Authority of Singapore and so on. So right now, it's now officially a tower under my AI and data policy. So that's a brief 1 year of what happened with what happened under AI and data policy.
That sounds, I've spent a lot of time speaking to a lot of banks, particularly around areas like AI, and it sounds like your bank is obviously doing a lot of work in that space. So that's fantastic stuff. Would you say that you're kind of one of the leading banks in the Philippines, if not in kind of like the Southeast Asian region, focusing on AI?
Well, I would say so, primarily because I kind of engage with banks in Southeast Asia, like in Singaporean banks and Hong Kong banks and so on. And we're the only ones in the Philippines whom I would be dealing with or discussing this matter. So I have to say that we are kind of one of the leading banks in that sphere.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, I'm delighted that we're speaking to you then on this topic. So, as I said, this topic is going to be focusing on kind of data and privacy. Perhaps you could give a quick overview as to why we are talking and why we're specifically focusing on the issues of data and privacy when it comes to artificial intelligence.
We have to see AI as both a technology platform or an enabler and at the same time a person. So, and just like a kid, you have to teach the AI as a person, and that person would have to learn our mindset. For me as a data privacy officer, I need to input everything that I consider as an ethical or privacy compliant into that AI. It kind of need a lot more collaboration among the developers. So I have to translate what I know into rules and algorithms. So mind you, I'm not really that technical. I just learn it also from scratch and so on. However, as a DPO, as a data privacy officer, I'm also considering certain jurisdictions, regulations on privacy like GDPR, wherein we have to consider that our users or customers would have to know that they're interacting with an AI. We have robots and we have customer relations officer, which is a virtual TV machine, and also the chatbot. And we have to integrate there that customers need to know that you're talking to an AI. So it's not really one of our representative, but also a robot. So we have to take into consideration that data lifecycle process, that your data or personal information is being collected by an AI. So that's one. So in privacy compliance, we have this data lifecycle like collect, access, use, store, share, retain, and then dispose. So it's kind of tricky in the AI sphere because collecting data in itself for AI is a lot already because of its nature, algorithmic nature, and it really collects a lot.
Yeah.
And we in the parameters of testing and so on, before we even deploy those AI projects, we have to assess or have different phases on testing. It's like creating a vaccine, wherein you have to really test all parameters and to check whether this person or the users will not be unfairly compromised by that kind of rule. So we have to take into consideration those kinds of parameters, and it really takes a while and really in-depth study how we going to deploy those kinds of parameters and how we in a way equate it with privacy compliance and ethical considerations, and at the same time provide an extremely robust customer experience. So basically, in a nutshell, that's AI considerations are in the privacy sphere and so on.
I'm just thinking as you're talking, there must be such interest from the very top of the bank in regards to this topic in this space. It must kind of really kind of be something that they look at and take interest in and interact with you and your team on as well. Seems such an important and big part of the business potentially now and in the future.
Yeah, and in fact, we have to lay down the proper foundation because we wanted to prevent any unfairly bias or against the customers. For example, this person was denied of a credit card transaction because the rule says that it's it's a fraud. But in AI, we have to devise it in such a way that we can provide a better customer experience and at the same time prevent them from being discriminated or disadvantaged of the situation. So it's really important for the AI and data policy to lay down the proper foundation, like the proper cement for to build the AI house.
Yeah, excellent. I think we've obviously seen a lot of moves by the regulators globally, and actually more closer to home with some updates and announcements made last year and this year from the HKMA and from MAS, for example. Perhaps you can give some context to this, to some of the what the regulators have been saying globally with IOSCO and more closer to home.
We have to consider that it's really needed. Like it's imperative for all regulators to take into consideration AI right now. One is because there's been a great appreciation of technology and digital transformation as well as AI adoption in all phases. I can cite some examples here in the Philippines. Our Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, our central bank here in the Philippines, are very open to this kinds of innovation. We're very fortunate to have this a regulatory body that's open to this innovative capabilities. If I can cite also, they even implemented its own AI project, which won them an award in Singapore last year. So they implemented AI chatbot as well for reporting purposes. So banks need to report to our regulators, and the AI would enable that. So in a way, that's the focus now, and that's where we're leading, where we're going. So it's about time, and it's just a matter of collaborating between regulator and the private sector, just like in the Veritas network that we're involved with. The MAS led the banks in Asia Pacific, including UnionBank there, to talk about and discuss what are the principles for which we need to bank on terms of AI and data analytics. So we call it AIDA. Then there's fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency principles. So we follow these principles, and the body and the conglomerate even presented or we come up with a framework in the fiat principles to be able to advance AIDA in a more ethical and to also ensure privacy in the process.
Yeah, so in terms of how much of priority this is for regulators themselves, would you say that this is kind of one of their top kind of items on the agenda for them to focus on? And is it a big concern that financial institutions or technology companies, for example, could be getting ahead of themselves? So yeah, is this a big priority for them?
Yeah, if you asked me the same question before the pandemic, my answer would be different. Right now, I think it's the priority. In the Philippines, we have various legislation bills filed by our lawmakers to address this kind of new technology. Even we have this national digital transformation bill and so on. And I believe that in terms of regulatory sphere and legislation sphere, it's now a priority. And even globally, like I've been reading Hong Kong, Singapore, even FINMA, they're focusing on this sphere because I guess laying down the proper foundation is key to a robust financial institution for financial institutions to develop using AI.
So I just want to try and understand. So what do you think, or where are you seeing some of the challenges at the moment with regards to financial institutions around the issues of privacy and ethics in terms of AI?
For financial institutions, so one of the key ingredients for us, or one of our key consideration, is bank secrecy laws. So it's in a way for putting in a new technology like AI, considering ethics and privacy in it, plus secrecy. It's quite difficult, right, to even implement the project. And in terms of risk perspective, implementing model validation and coming up with the testing parameters, it's really a painful process. As I mentioned, we have to treat AI as a child. Like we have to put it in steps like kindergarten and then elementary and then teenage years. and we really have to stress test them and so on, and put in, as long as we have the proper foundation and train them and then stress test the technology in terms of use cases. I guess it's going to be a successful endeavor, and I guess it should be a joint collaboration between the regulator and the financial institution. So ultimately, that's at the end of the day, that's the end goal for the AI initiatives to succeed.
I'm really curious. I mean, you don't have to answer this question for your bank, but how big is the size of the team? I mean, is this going to be a huge? I mean, actually saying that, it's perhaps a silly question, because you'd like to think with AI, it's the technology that's doing a lot of the work, but there still needs to be a lot of people, obviously, doing the coding, doing the data processing, all that type of stuff as well. So is this starting to become quite a large, not only focus, but also team within the institution or within institutions?
I'm speaking for the bank. It's not that big, but we have this culture of collaboration. So it doesn't for my team, we're only few, but we're engaging with a lot of teams. So this kind of project is not that, short-manned in a way, but it's just really a matter of putting in the proper people all together, coming up with the proper developers, algorithm, and framework in the first place, and then the testing. It's very important for us.
Yeah, that leads me on to an interesting question. Obviously, there's the financial institutions themselves are building teams internally to focus on AI and look at areas of data and privacy, for example, with roles that you have within the institution. But obviously, as well, they're looking to work with third-party vendors, RegTech companies, fintech companies, etc., on AI, on RegTech tools around AI, etc. So, this will obviously either be through APIs, through SaaS, through custom builds, on-premise, in cloud, etc. So, should there be is there an argument, or should there be a concern around working with external parties and the fact that they aren't regulated, but yet so much of the technology and the data is being processed externally potentially, and in some cases, obviously, that could even be sent offshore to data centers that sit outside the Philippines, in Singapore or in Indonesia or in other places like the US and Europe. So is there a lot of conversation in your world as a data officer? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but is there concern, I suppose, around the risks with third parties when it comes to data and privacy?
I guess for engaging third-party service providers, it's a must. It's a necessity. For one, AI is a new emerging field, which the bank is not that an expert on. So we're expert on financial transactions, so on. But putting in new innovation and new capabilities and platforms it takes a village, and we have to consider also engaging third-party service providers that are equipped and competent. Here in the Philippines, every time we launch a product, especially with those that have cloud component in it, and this one, like AI, and all of our AI projects have to get sign off or approval by our regulator. So that's the Bangko Sentral, the central bank here in the Philippines.
So each institution you work with, each technology company you work with would get approval from the regulator?
It's us who, it's the bank that applies for that kind of approval.
Yes.
So in a way, we conduct due diligence. We ask where the data will be resided, or in terms of data sovereignty, we have to map out where the data goes and so on. And the regulator will sign off on that. So fortunately for the banks here in the Philippines, our regulators are very open to such innovation, and they also help us, like how do we improve on providing security, privacy, and how we enable financial inclusion ultimately to Filipinos.
We should try and get the regulator on next time.
Yeah, that's good.
So kind of on from that question about the kind of the data and how it's being used and potentially used offshore, onshore, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously in Asia Pacific, a lot of institutions are Pan-Asian, if not global, sharing technology, resources, operations, et cetera, across the region. What are the challenges when it comes to AI? I mean, can financial institutions have a central processing unit, so to speak, for big data and for AI? Could UnionBank, for example, have a main AI center in somewhere like Singapore, that is actually working across all the different businesses across Asia Pacific? Is that how it could work, or are the regulators quite strict in terms of where the data is being processed from from a privacy data and AI perspective?
Here in the Philippines, the discussion is still nascent into that aspect. But you're looking at use cases like Singapore, wherein the Central Monetary Authority would have the discretion to do that. The repository for that. Here in the Philippines, we're trying out small projects into that effect. Like we're starting with digital identity. And then probably from that we'll spring something we can enable AI in it and so on. But it's still in the works, and we're getting there, and we're checking on use cases from other jurisdictions as well.
Interesting, you mentioned digital identity. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in a fireside chat again. But I want to just ask you quickly around, a lot of the conversations that we've been having, that we're having today, as I see it, is very much around the use case within consumer banking, focusing on the individuals, for example, looking at fraud, onboarding. All of this impacts the retail customer, the person on the high street, et cetera, et cetera. But are there other kind of parts of the bank, whether it's your bank or other banks, that you see AI being an interesting play, and also an area where data and privacy has to be taken into consideration, like typical investment banking activities or trading, for example?
Right now, we're actually looking at behavioral science in integrating AI in it, and studying how consumers will tend to purchase and so on, and how can this be integrated into a proper model for fraud detection or consumer credit scoring and transaction monitoring. It's a good use case. A study on the asset management and implementing AI in it, I wondered, why the focus on it, and we really have to lay down the proper framework also for AI to properly process or integrate into systems in such a way that it will still comply with anti-money laundering or privacy compliance and so on. So it's in a way integrating the new emerging capabilities like behavioral science, and so on, would greatly help in the retail and consumers sphere. So it's still in the works, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I did some work, the last couple of years in the wealth management space and asset management space. And again, we were spending a bit of our time looking at the application of AI. A lot of the questions we have were around data and privacy. When we were talking at events, when we were meeting with potential prospects and clients, again, the biggest and hottest kind of topics on the table were around data. Where is it being held? How are you using it? Where's it being processed? Because we were essentially doing a lot of stuff on AWS, and that was in certain locations around the globe. So I think it's interesting seeing the applications outside of traditional kind of banking, looking at it in the wealth management and asset management space as well. So we've got a few more minutes of this session. I've got one kind of final, I guess, fun question to ask. Before that, Maria, is there anything you kind of wanted to add to the conversation or talk about kind of before we wrap up?
No, basically pretty much said everything about this.
So my final kind of, and I say fun, but it probably isn't fun at all to whoever it might impact. How long before we might see an AI being kind of fined or punished, whatever you want to call it, by a regulator? What do you think? Do you think it's going to be pretty soon? Do you think it's going to be in the next 5 years? Or do you think it's just not going to happen because it's so good?
I think it will happen when the regulator is also the AI. So
wow.
I don't know. It's like Skynet. People are naturally afraid of bots and AI because the movies say they will kill them eventually. However, we need to look back and see how AI is really making our lives easier, and especially in this time in pandemic, right? We rely heavily on technology, to bring food, using our cell phones and so on. But it also predicts what usually are food cravings and so on. But in this time, we have to lay down the proper framework, ethical consideration. Like, I'm actually a graduate of philosophy, so I've been studying categorical imperatives, the ethical framework, and so on. And what's constant in the world is, having the moral standards, and technologies
Yeah,
will change every time, but ethics are constant. I mean, ethics and moral obligations are constant.
foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, as Socrates would say, we need philosopher kings and queens. So, and it's about high time that AI and data policy would have to lay down, the bricks and mortar of AI framework governance for people not to be disadvantaged or, in a way, be harmed by technology. We can put in a way that I'm quoting altered carbon, wherein, the AI people would be punished in such a way that their person will be deleted and so on, or they be limited
yeah,
in terms of capabilities. But I think that will be a long time unless, there's an AI god, or an AI regulator would have to implement that. So I think that's where we're coming. But
excellent.
yeah.
I never thought we would be discussing Socrates on a conversation at Regulation Asia, so that is fantastic and a great way to end. Maria, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated chatting to you. As with our other sessions, I'm sure we could keep talking about this topic, so thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning into this session. We're going to have a short break now. We're going to have like a 15-minute break before our next session. Really do encourage you to network with the hundreds of people that are on the platform. Make sure you also go to the booth. So our wonderful sponsors supporting this event have their stands and their booths, and they have their executives there. So please do go and have a chat and find out some of the cool stuff that they're doing, what they're doing in the AI space, data space, etc., etc. So thank you all very much. Thank you.